Coming up on The Cost of Living.
A lot of people, were skilled at computers, technically skilled, but didn't have jobs and couldn't get high-paying jobs. And so they moved to online to try and remedy that. And they've been very successful for 2 decades, really.
What are they so good at? Cybercrime. After the Cold War, tech bros in places like Russia needed to make money. So they started hacking and coming after Canadian companies. Hi, I'm Paul Havershrud. Welcome to The Cost of Living. London Drugs is the latest Canadian company to get hit by hackers. They all face the same question, and it's our data that hangs in the balance. To pay or not to pay? Also today, the wisdom of the crowd says that a bunch of people are better at coming up with ideas than just one. More companies are now leaning into this kind of thinking. They're asking what they should make and then selling those ideas back to us. Up first, the bank of mom and dad used to be $10 a month for an allowance. Now, parents are putting up houses as collateral for their kids' mortgages. They say money and friendship don't mix. But what about family? Let's count the ways buying a home has become harder. Real estate prices in a lot of places have doubled in the last 15 years. Interest rates shot up at the fastest pace ever, so mortgage payments are more expensive. And you can only qualify for smaller mortgages. Jennifer Keene, if you're out there, you're trying to buy a house, none of that is awesome.
No, especially if you're trying to buy your first home, like Christian Kang did recently. He's 29 years old. He works in finance in Toronto, so he's pretty good with his money. He'd saved $55,000 for a down payment. He had his eye on a one-bedroom condo, but
I was taking a look at the mortgage calculator. I was probably only able to qualify for about $400,000 maximum. My place is about $680,000. So I had felt like I may be trapped renting forever.
So between his mortgage and his down payment, he could spend around $450,000, which is a good chunk of change.
Sure, but not if you want to buy an almost $700,000 condo in Toronto, right? So his parents stepped in to help him. They gave him cash and they took out a line of credit so that he could buy his condo.
Nice parents.
Yeah, and this is happening all over the country. Roughly 30% of new home buyers in Canada get some financial help from their parents these days, and that's up from 20% in 2015. This is from a recent CIBC report. But in cities like Vancouver or Toronto, it may be even higher. When I asked Christian how many of his friends have gotten help,
I want to say probably about 100% of them. I have a few buddies that have bought places with their wives, and they've even still needed to get family help as well. It's tough to buy a home in Toronto.
100% of his friends who have bought houses, every last one of them, has gotten help from their parents.
Well, the average home price in Toronto is over $1 million. It's $1.3 million in Vancouver.
And Jen, that sound you just heard is like the dream of Canadian homeownership, just dying a not-so-slow death.
That's not you slapping the desk?
Well, maybe it was. I was trying for the radio's theater of the mind. But, when you think about this, it's a big deal because homeownership, it's seen as a way to build wealth. And if that is out of reach, then where does that leave people?
Yeah, the math is not great right now. Even if you make $100,000 a year, say, that's more than most people in Canada, you might get approved for a mortgage of about 4 times your income, so $400,000.
And if you need more, like Christian did, that's where parents come in.
And that, let's be honest, can get complicated. Whenever you've got money and family mixing together, for example, if you go to the bank of mom and dad, your bankers may want to come shopping with you. Justin Bregman sells real estate in Toronto. He says he sees clients bring their parents along with them.
Lots. becomes a bit challenging for me because you got more cooks in the kitchen and more opinions. And they usually have the final say because they are quite invested in it. And, giving their kids advice, and some of it's old school advice when, the times are just different right now. I think if the parents are involved one way or another in terms of down payment or co-signing, then they become a decision maker.
So you've got parents, they're out there with their adult kids. I mean, you can just feel the boundaries getting trampled here left and right.
Right. I mean, these kids aren't kids anymore. And this kind of plays into some of the stereotypes about millennials not growing up, right? Paul Kershaw doesn't have a lot of time for this. He's a professor of public policy at UBC. He founded the think tank Generation Squeeze. Paul says this kind of financial dependency between generations, it's a double-edged sword.
I love the intergenerational solidarity. I hate the way it infantilizes young adults and makes it seem like, well, you still can't get by without having to rely on your adult parents if only you were just more personally responsible and made better life choices and didn't have so many lattes and avocado toast and a cell phone. You too could be a housing. No, that's BS.
Yeah, skipping avocado toast, I don't think that's going to do it in terms of, buying a house in Vancouver.
It would take a lot of avocado toast. I mean, Paul Kershaw is very concerned about generational fairness. If you look at people who bought their homes 20, 30, 40 years ago, they've benefited hugely from the run-up in prices. He thinks parents should share their good luck with their kids.
And if they had that luck, then that's great. Share away, but it feels like that's also leaving out a whole bunch of parents who didn't buy those houses 20 years ago, or if they were lifetime renters, or what if you're a new Canadian that just got here? I mean, where does that leave any of those groups?
It's good. It's a good question, and it's been highlighted in recent StatsCan reports. Home ownership is becoming something that gets passed down in Canada. You're now more likely to own a home, Paul Kershaw says, if your parents owned a home.
It matters less now how much one is earning in terms of your ability to afford secure housing, especially in some of our biggest cities, but typically cities now more and more across the country. And it matters more, do you have attachment to someone else who has housing wealth that they're willing to share with you at this moment?
Well, they have to be willing to share it with you, but they also have to be able to share as well. And not every parent out there can help with a down payment.
No, that's why some parents are getting creative. They take out lines of credit, or maybe they take out reverse mortgages to tap into the equity that's in their homes. According to, a recent report from StatsCan, nearly 30% of homes purchased in Toronto by people who were born in the 90s, they are now co-owned with their parents.
Is some of that due to multi-generational living arrangements?
Yes, but about a third of the time, it's parents co-signing the mortgage and just handing it over to the kids.
Co-signing? Well, if you're co-signing, I mean, that's on you. That comes with some risk.
Yeah, that's something to think about, right? Kelly Ho certainly thinks so. She's a financial planner in Vancouver, and she says both parents and kids really need to have their eyes open when they get into this kind of arrangement.
Obviously, there are risks associated with that because when you're co-signing, if your child or children default on the mortgage, you are now on the hook. So that can destroy your entire financial situation.
So helping your kids could also potentially blow up your retirement.
And even if you're not co-signing a mortgage, if you're just straight up giving cash to your kids for a down payment, Kelly says everyone should be clear about the arrangement. Is this money a gift or is it a loan? When do I have to pay it back? And then there are other things to consider.
People don't get married and stay married forever anymore. There are situations where separations and divorces happen. So what are the terms and conditions associated with that in the event of a marital separation?
She says, say you give your son or daughter some cash for a down payment when they get married. Then the couple gets divorced soon after. Like, do you get half your money back?
When you're wedding planning and everything is bright and shiny and new and you're in love, like that is not the kind of conversation you want to have.
No, it's true. I mean, Kelly's not saying you shouldn't help your kids. She's just saying, well, make sure you understand each other.
Because if you're not all on the same page,
yeah, that's when you can have problems. And these might be hard conversations to have, but here we are. Because buying your first house in parts of Canada, you just might need your parents' help. There's no way around it.
And a lot of those parents, as you say, they are sitting on a bunch of money in their houses. They had good timing, a lot better timing than their kids had.
They got lucky. And so, maybe you want to pass some of that on. That's how it turned out for Christian Kang in Toronto. He had always dreamed of owning a home by the time he turned 30. And he did get there, but it only happened because he had some family help. And now...
Oh, it's amazing. Like we said before, there's a little bit more freedom and this feeling of, I don't have to look for a new place every year, or, I can upsize. So there's mobility in the future, and it does feel good. It really does.
So Christian, at least, was able to get onto that first rung of the housing ladder.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jen.
You're welcome.
This is The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Haberstrood. When Planters Peanuts needed a logo, this was back in 1916, it ran a contest. A teenager from Virginia entered, and he gave the world Mr. Peanut. For that, he got the princely sum of $5. It was an early win for crowdsourcing. Today, social media makes it easier than ever to ask people what they're thinking. And as our producer Ellis Cho finds, more companies are asking.
Fluvog Shoes is a brand that's been around for more than 50 years. And when somebody's wearing a pair, you know it.
Oh, they're lovely. They remind me of Alice in Wonderland, if you can think of all the art from that.
Aidan Shipley is a textile artist in Calgary. He's a big fan of Fluvog. When he found out the company solicits design ideas from customers, he was in.
So, on the heel and the toe, we have a white zigzag pattern, very, very white on black.
Aidan called it the Zebra Derby. Think traditional Oxford meets punk rock.
It's a men's black and white brogue, and it's definitely more of a formal shoe, but if you want to add some pep in your step, these are the way to go. Yeah.
Fluvog loved it, and now it's available in black and burgundy for $369. More companies like Fluvog are crowdsourcing ideas, turning to their customers for inspiration and feedback. IKEA, BMW, Mattel, they all do it. And why not?
Well, it is a cheaper way to get new ideas.
Sharon McIntyre is a marketing and innovation consultant. She says crowdsourcing isn't new, but technology makes it easier than ever to reach a lot of people quickly.
In the olden days, the reason you wouldn't was logistically challenging. Like, how do you get 10,000 people to give you authentic feedback and collaborate on making a concept better? Well, today on collaborative digital platforms, you can do that and do it very efficiently.
Crowdsourcing can increase customer engagement and sales. At Lego, fans pitch ideas regularly. Once an idea gets 10,000 votes and approval from the company, it becomes a kit.
And then you can imagine that once that kit is launched, you have 10,000 brand fans and ambassadors who are telling their friends, oh my God, they've got a Doctor Who kit coming out. Isn't that amazing?
All those kits sell out. Crowdsourcing is also a way for a brand to build community, something Fluvog is known for.
It's just inspiring, and now I'm getting goosebumps just talking about the way that Fluvoggers even interact with each other.
Stephen Bailey is the company's chief marketing officer.
We have a conference once a year called Flumunity Fest, where Fluvoggers come from all over the world to a different city each year. And we have a big festival, and it's not about selling shoes. It's about giving Fluvoggers a place centrally where they can interact with each other in person, because they interact so much with each other online.
That kind of community builds brand loyalty, and brand loyalty means sales. But what's crowdsourcing worth to the customer? Sharon McIntyre says sometimes they get prize money or royalties. Sometimes it's
kind of like a brush with, your favorite celebrity, but in this case, it's a brand.
In exchange for his winning shoe design, Aidan Shipley got a free pair, a write-up on Fluvog's website, and...
I have, you could say, street cred as an artist now. My name is out there internationally. My name is on the shoe. This is the Aidan shoe. That's probably the tip top on my resume right now. That is the coolest thing I can tell people about myself.
For the cost of living, I'm Ellis Cho.
This is The Cost of Living on your radio, by podcast, and on Sirius Channel 169. I'm Paul Habersrud. What do the RCMP, Sobeys, and the Toronto Zoo have in common? They're all recent targets of cyber criminals. London Drugs is the latest victim of a ransomware attack. This is a type of software, or malware as it's known, that locks down your data until you pay up. London Drugs said it wouldn't pay the $25 million bounty. Now, the attackers may have released some of the stolen data onto the dark web. This can all sound very Mission Impossible, but it's not exactly Ethan Hunt dangling from a rope stealing the knock list. It's just a bunch of dudes with laptops. So what are the chances we stop hearing about these kinds of cyber attacks? Kim Zetter is a journalist and author. She covers cybersecurity and national security for the New York Times, Washington Post, Wired, and others. Hello.
Hello.
So, Kim, what do you think of London Drugs and its choice to say, no, we're not paying?
Well, they wouldn't be the first. There are other victims of ransomware that have refused to pay, and they're oftentimes in different situations. You know, if they actually have backed up data that they can access, they might feel like they don't need the data from the perpetrators. If they have extra systems, they don't need those. It really depends, and we don't really know the situation that London Drug is in. I mean, I think, as I understand it, they've said that they don't have the money to pay. But what is interesting is, you know, so the gang that allegedly hacked the London Drug is the Lockbit gang. And they were taken down, or their infrastructure was taken down by law enforcement in February. And law enforcement obtained some of the encryption keys from the infrastructure that they grabbed. And that allows them to make the keys available to victims so that they can unlock their data without having to pay. Clearly, law enforcement doesn't want people to be paying, but it hasn't stopped, ransomware attacks from going up.
Okay, and you mentioned Lockbit, this group, this gang, you called them. Who is Lockbit?
So Lockbit is what we call it a ransomware ransomware as a service. It's not quite a pyramid scheme, but it is a business scheme where you have the people who create the crypto ransomware, the actual malicious code, and they make it available to what they call affiliates who want to use it then to conduct their ransomware attacks and take the ransoms, bring in money, and then the Lockbit people at the helm of that will then take a percentage of that. So they're making available the skill set, to produce the malware. They may offer other services. They may actually give you access to vulnerable systems. They may give you a phishing kit so that you can send phishing emails to victims. They may give you, direct access to a system that they've already hacked. So they can be sort of different kinds of tiers of service that you pay for. And so what's happening there is the affiliate makes a lot of money, and the ransomware people behind the ransom malware also make money.
So Lockbit are basically like these master coders, and then they kind of are franchisees. They sort of franchise stuff. They license it out to other groups, and then the other groups are like, okay, we're going to take the ball from here.
Absolutely, yes.
Do we know where these groups are based, whether it's Lockbit or other groups?
Well, we know from some indictments and sanctions and things that come out of government, some of the people that have been arrested in Lockbit were in Poland, the Netherlands, and Ukraine. And then the cybercrime forum where they offer their service is a Russian-speaking one. So that can either be based in Russia or it may be Ukrainian. We don't often talk about Ukrainian crime groups, but they are just as notorious as Russian online crime groups. And sometimes there is, partnerships between them, Ukrainians and Russians, and especially before the war. Less so now, but the Ukrainian cybercrime community is very robust and has been around for about 2 decades.
Now, why Russia or Eastern Europe, places like Ukraine? I mean, you mentioned that. I'm sure it's not just there, but why does this seem to be centered in and around there?
It began because of with the collapse of the Soviet Union. A lot of people, were skilled at computers, technically skilled, but didn't have jobs and couldn't get high-paying jobs. And so they moved online to try and remedy that. And they've been very successful for 2 decades, really, and changing their tactics each time. And ransomware is just sort of the latest iteration of these cybercrime groups. But they started out doing what we call carding, which is stealing credit card numbers from online e-commerce sites, and then monetizing those in certain ways.
Okay, so now Lockbit is threatening to sell the information they stole from London Drugs on the dark web. I mean, I hear the word dark web and all of a sudden my head goes into all sorts of places. But okay, so assuming they do this, who buys it there, this information?
Well, it depends on what the information is that's available and who wants it. It can be sold, for instance, if let's say London Drugs did lose information that was patient information about prescriptions, then you can potentially have maybe an intelligence agency would be interested in that to sift through, to find information about medical conditions, health concerns that they may want to use for blackmail, to try and get someone to spy on their behalf. You can get sometimes competitors may want sensitive information, company information that gets leaked. And then also there is, if it's sort of personally identifiable information that someone can use to steal your identity, that can be valuable as well. But probably the most lucrative form would be to sell it to a competitor or to sell it to some kind of government agency.
So if these hacker groups can go after big targets, they can go after whoever they want in the world, why do they seem to come after or why in this case do they come after a little kind of mid-sized drugstore chain in Canada, or they've gone after the Toronto Public Library? These seem like fairly kind of random targets.
Yeah, and some of them are. So these are affiliate groups, right? So they're not necessarily very skilled or necessarily very smart. They may be doing sort of, spray and pray kind of operations where they just hit whoever is vulnerable and then they see what they can get from it.
Are there other scary targets out there that we, basically as a country or we as citizens don't want to see these groups go after?
Well, you don't want them going after banking systems, right? And you don't want them going after, we had an attack here in the U.S., critical infrastructure against the Colonial Pipeline, which was responsible for distributing, fuel to the Eastern Seaboard and a large portion of the Eastern Seaboard. And in that case, the attack didn't actually prevent gas from reaching people, but there was a panic. And so then there was a run on gasoline stations, and then there was a shortage because of that. So if you can imagine doing that very strategically, with critical infrastructure, you can cause a lot of chaos and a lot of panic. So if you can go after things like that, you can actually impact the public in a serious way.
So when you think about the decision to pay these groups or not to pay these groups, on one hand, it seems simple. Well, don't pay them. They'll go away because there's no incentive to do it. But it feels like you're describing some very real risks in making that kind of decision.
There are risks. I know that, we're talking about it more and more here in the U.S. There's been some very vocal proponents of this ban on paying ransoms. The problem is that the victim is the one that's going to suffer, right? So you can make these decisions, but then how are you helping the victim? And people who are proponents of this say, well, it will be very painful for the first few months and maybe 6 months, but if everyone actually agrees to it and does it, then you will put these groups out of business. I'm not so sure about that, because what you're going to have also is sort of an underground economy emerge from this, which will be companies that will do the ransomware payment for you. And they'll do it in a way that maybe can't be traced. So if you're a victim and you get hacked and you're in a country that says you're banned from paying the ransom, you may go to this affiliate, this other company, that will guarantee that they can pay it for you without it being traced back to you. So there's just a lot of logistical issues around how this would work, how it would be enforced. I mean, how many governments are really going to prosecute victims twice? You would victimize them twice. First getting hit by the ransomware, and then potentially being prosecuted for violating the ban. So there's just a lot of questions here about how something like that would actually work and whether it would actually have the impact that you want it to have.
When it comes to something like ransomware, it feels like I have this feeling of helplessness. Like there's these bad actors, they're out there, they're doing this stuff, it seems to keep coming up, and here I am just doing what? Like throwing up my hands.
I mean, the government is doing a lot. Governments, there are task forces, there are multinational efforts to do this, and they're doing a lot of different activity to try and address these groups. They're taking down infrastructure. They're making keys, decryption keys available to victims. They are sanctioning ransomware actors. They're trying to do a lot. They're trying to nab them when they leave. So if they're in Russia, they're protected unless they leave and go on vacation. And it turns out that Russian ransomware actors and hackers love to go on vacation in sunny climates in the winters. And that's often how they get nabbed. Maybe a little less so now during the war, but that's traditionally how they've been nabbed. So there is sort of this multi-pronged effort to try and chip away at it, but the problem is so massive. Even the takedowns, the one that I described in February with Lockbit, once they took down the infrastructure, these groups basically just build other infrastructure and put it up. It takes them some time, obviously, and it slows them down. But ultimately, there's a motivation to get up and running again because this is, hugely lucrative. So it's hard to see that this stopping. And, what would really end it, of course, is if Russia cared and cracked down on it. But that's not going to happen anytime soon.
Well, Kim Zetter, thank you, I think.
You're welcome. Sorry to leave you on a sour note.
Hey, you have a commitment to the truth. Kim Zetter is a journalist and author. She covers cybersecurity and national security for publications like the New York Times, Washington Post, Wired, and others. That's all for this week. The Cost of Living is based in Calgary. And here's something. You can now listen to the show on YouTube. Just go to the CBC News page, scroll down a bit, and there we are. The show is produced by Danielle Nerman, Ellis Cho, and Jennifer Keene. With help from Dave, I still see Mike Modano in my nightmares, Waddell. Our executive producer is Tracy Johnson. I'm Paul Havershrud. Thanks for listening.